Right.
Good afternoon to the Wookiee Art Group. Sonia's asked me to repeat a lecture that I did a couple of years ago in Joburg about Greek icons. I'm going to give it a slightly different slant so that the two Wookiees won't be bored. And also I've been thinking a lot about it, and I'm going to try and put the icon into its place in the history of the depiction of the religious figure. So that is going to be my focus this afternoon. I'm going to split this video into two because last time the whole thing didn't go through, it was too long, so I do a little break in the middle and we'll start it again, so it'll come in two parts. First of all, I'm going to do a little bit of history for context, because you have to understand the context of our European civilization to enable you to place into the correct position the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. So I'm leaving out the Egyptians. They're not relevant here, well, barely. And I'm going to start reminding you about the Greek civilization, which lasted 1,000 years from, actually it didn't. It lasted for 1,400 years. It went from 800 BC to 200 AD. No, that's 1,000 years. No, it's not. How long is that, Fez?
800 B. How much? 800 BC.
That's 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
That's 1,000 years. Okay. Now, you'll remember from school and from common knowledge that the Greeks had multiple gods and heroes. They had this amazing pantheon of gods who interacted with the humans, they interacted with people and controlled their destiny. They were like fates, and they had all sorts of influence. We see all of this is going to be from an art perspective now. So I'm going to show you just one example of a Greek depiction of a god. And we have no idea whether the Greeks painted on walls, whether they painted murals. We don't know. There's nothing that exists. But we do know that they painted very beautifully on Greek amphorae, the great big clay pots in which they kept wine and water and oil. And here is a simple drawing. It's dated about 400 to 500 years BC. And you can see from this little illustration how skilled they were at the line drawing and how concerned they were with the beauty of the human body. Fez, can you try and get up close to that? It is entirely a line drawing, and we know this is a god because this god has got wings, and she's awarding a ribbon to this youth, and a ribbon was like a prize, a symbol. He was probably, I don't think you've got enough light there, he was probably an athlete. So I'm just showing you one example, and look at it carefully because we're going to carry on looking at different depictions of gods in this afternoon's talk. Okay, so that was the Greek. I'm going to put on the top light so that you can see the photographs better. It's quite late in the afternoon. Then, partly in tandem with the Greeks, the Roman civilization developed, and the Roman civilization went on for 800 years.
Sit.
800 years, please don't shout at them, from 500 BC to 300 AD, okay? So it lasted a little bit longer than the Greek, and largely overlapped. Now, we all know that the Romans adopted the Greek gods and gave them their own names, and they maintained all the Greek type mythological stories about the gods, but the Romans were not at all prescriptive about the religion in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, of course, got bigger and bigger and bigger. They controlled huge areas of the Western Europe, as far as Ireland, and they controlled most of Asia Minor, and certainly down into Palestine and into Egypt and into North Africa. It was a vast empire, and it must have been terribly difficult to hold it all together. It was very difficult to hold it all together, and they didn't care what religion people practiced. It was irrelevant to them. They were not prescriptive. Then, along in 200 AD came the Christians, and they had been infiltrating since Christ's death. They had been infiltrating gradually North Africa, up into Syria, along into where Turkey is now, and eventually they landed up in Rome. And the Romans didn't like this at all, because the Romans, the emperor, was treated like a hero god. The emperor was the godhead, really, of the Roman Empire. So in a way, all the honor that would have gone to a overall god, a pan god, not a pan god, the highest of the holies, went to the emperor and not to all the little religions that were practiced all over the place. Okay, so this is important. The Christians were not welcomed because they were teaching a completely different doctrine. And I want to read just a little piece here to you, which will make it clear. 56. Okay, we can. The early Christians had a new and different outlook on life. Their thoughts were centered on the Savior and on the life hereafter, rather than on their own strength or on the glories of this earth, which was what the Romans practiced. Thus, the beauty and power of the human body, so important in Greek and Roman art, no longer held much meaning for them. Instead, they wanted pictures that would show the power and glory of Christ and tell of his mission on earth. Now, the early Christian painter could not do this directly. He could only hint at it by using symbols. That is, figures or signs that stand for something which we cannot see. These signs are called symbols, and very often, well, of course, we know the Christian symbol, the cross, now stood for this new religion. And the idea of the shepherd with his flock of sheep was one of the very earliest symbols that was used for Christ. Probably it comes from the Gospels, but there were many pictures underground in the catacombs, I'll explain that later, of the Christ figure surrounded by his sheep, meaning the body of the church. Body of the new church was the sheep. They were symbolic of the new Christians, and the shepherd was symbol of Christ. So the Christians were pushed underground. They literally hid in caves and catacombs underneath the earth. They practiced in their little churches underneath the ground, and their art became more symbolic and moved definitely away from the beautiful bodies that had been depicted in the Roman and the Greek artistic endeavors. Okay. Then they carried on trying. They were very brave, these people. They had terrible deaths. They were hunted. And eventually, because the Christians just wouldn't give up, Emperor Constantine was converted to the faith. And that changed everything. Constantine was a very powerful emperor. And he changed the face of world history in 323 because he moved the head of the Roman Empire. He moved the center of the Roman Empire to Byzantium. Byzantium was a Greek town in Turkey. We now call it Istanbul. You'll all know where it is. Constantine moved to Byzantium because he was having such trouble controlling the whole of this very unwieldy Roman Empire. Also, he was starting to get all sorts of threats coming down from the north. All the barbarian tribes were coming down and pushing down towards Italy, pushing through Germany, pushing down to Italy. He couldn't hold on. He moved his court to Byzantium, where he felt safer and it was more central. So Constantine immediately started glorifying and building, with his vast resources, beautiful churches, glorifying the Christian religion in Byzantium. And it was he who built Hagia Sophia, the greatest church, really, of the Christian church, certainly of the Orthodox Church. And when he died, Justinian took over, and Justinian was an even more powerful emperor who carried on Christianizing Byzantium and making it the most glorious city. So that takes us to about 500 years after Christ died. And then, by then, huge trouble had developed in the Roman Empire. It was splitting in two. They couldn't hold it together, and religion was one of the main problems that split the Roman Empire. Apart from logistics, which couldn't be handled, the Pope was a very strong religious leader in Rome. The Pope in St. Peter's Church. It was not like it is today, but the original St. Peter's Church in Rome. And the Pope divorced himself completely from the state. The Pope had his own Vatican City inside Rome, and the Roman emperor or his representative in Rome kept the government completely separate. So this church and the state were completely separate in the West. Meanwhile, in the East, in Byzantium, the emperor and the church were the same. The emperor was treated almost like a god, and I'll show you an example of this. Here is an early illustration of Justinian, Emperor Justinian. It's round about 500 AD, and you see it's a mosaic, and you see how he has a halo around his head. So he's
Is that the
equating.
emperor?
That's the emperor. It is the Byzantine emperor, and he is equating himself with God. He has a halo around his head. Okay, so this is terribly important for icons, because not long after this we have the iconoclastic debate. And before I get into that, I want to tell you that from about the time that Constantine moved his court to Byzantium, the art form of icons started proliferating. They started growing, and instead of the artists placing all their emphasis into the new cathedrals and things, they started painting on little wooden panels. They would paint the Savior, they would paint the Madonna and Child, they would paint the different saints, and this became a very prevalent and popular religious part of the religious life of the Byzantine people. It did not happen in the West. The West never had icons. But the East in Byzantium, it started from about 400 or 500 after Christ. As soon as the Christians came into Byzantium, they started making icons. Okay. Now I'm stopping there for a little bit because I'm leaving the East for a while and I'm going to return to the Christians in Rome. And I'm going to show you examples of how the Christian art developed in Rome. Remember, already when Constantine left in 300 and something, they were already under threat from the Goths, the Visigoths, the Normans, all sorts of barbarian tribes, like the Vikings, were moving down into Europe and threatening the Roman Empire. The Christians, I have to go back a little bit. I want to show you what the Christians, how, not necessarily Christian, 56, sorry about this, 54, yes. This is an early Christian, I'll come closer for you, please, just sit still. This is an early Christian panel. It was made in Rome. It was part of, I would think it was part of a triptych that went in an altarpiece in Rome. And I want you to notice how much the style has changed from the Egyptian, from the Greek picture that we saw at the beginning.
Top, bottom, both.
Oh no, I've missed out a whole lot. Can you just stop for a minute? Stop for a minute. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself and I missed out quite an important thing. I'm going back to the Romans before the Christians came. Before the Christians came. And I want you to see how much the Romans developed over and above what we saw from the Greeks. Here as an example is 200 AD, and look at this portrait. It's not a religious work. It's not Christian. It is just a picture of a man. It's a brilliant painting on a mural done in some sort of egg tempera, probably. But do you see how realistic it is? How the mouth is modeled? It's not stylized at all. The eyes are very big, and this will be important as we explore the Christian face as it develops. But huge development in Roman painting, and they painted the things that we paint today. They painted gardens, they painted landscapes, they painted the hills in the background, they painted still lifes, and they painted portraits. So then I want to show you this number 54. This is 300 years later, and look how the depiction of the face has changed here. This is a Madonna and child. The child is very damaged, but please see the stylization of this face. The hair has, compared to the last image we saw, the hair has gone, the eyes are very simplified, the mouth is just a little bow, it's like a little leaf. And this sort of face will be carried through into the icon tradition, as you will see. Then the Dark Ages hit. The Dark Ages happened because the Goths wrecked Rome. They wrecked the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire fell apart in the West. The Pope remained strong. The Vatican resisted all of this, and the Goths started to infiltrate into the Roman population. They more or less subjugated the whole of Europe, and the Dark Ages ensued. Now, we know in the Dark Ages there was no art. There was a hell of a lot of fighting. There was a lot of death. There was no time for art. There was no time for building churches. Nothing got built. Everything was destroyed. And for a long time, Europe was very, very dormant. Then, in about the 1100s, let me tell you on one side, it was quite different in the East. Europe went down into the depths of the Dark Ages, but in the East, with Constantine and Justinian and the Byzantine Empire, remained strong and productive and produced amazing architecture and art, but I'm going to come to that separately. We're handling the West now. In about 1100 or 1200, the artists started to wake up. The Gothic sort of culture had been absorbed and assimilated in the West, and things started to come to life again. I'm going to show you a stained glass window. It's French. It's at Le Mans, where the Formula One happens. Look at this amazing stained glass window. Faiz, you're right in the light. Can we try and take it from there so that we get the light on it over there? This stained glass window, look at it carefully. Look how expressive it is. By this I mean, look at the movement of the saints. They're all expressing something. They're reaching up. They're talking with their hands. They're not static. They're very mobile. Look at the beautiful lines. Look how they're looking up to the sky. Look at how this guy is saying, "Oh, what's going on up there?" It's very important, this. It represents a movement in Western art that is divorcing it very much from what was happening in the East. Get outside. Lie down. Then I'm going to show you the Avignon Pieta, which is one of the greatest paintings in the world, I think. Number 115. Number 115. Don't stand in the light, Faiz. There you are. Can you see that? Avignon Pieta. Very beautiful painting. It is the death of Christ. He is lying in the Virgin's, in Mary's lap. Look at the development of that face. Look how modern that face looks. Look how much emotion there is. This Mary is crying. She's crying into her napkin. Beautifully expressive hands, expressing the agony that he has been through. It is full of emotion. Okay? Can you see it? Not going to be too dark. I hope not.
Just
Okay. And then Western art carries on, of course, absolutely flourishing, because after this we get the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a revelation because gradually documents and drawings and charts and things started emerging from Byzantium and going over to Europe, and it illustrated the incredible achievements of the Greeks and the Romans. And the people of the Dark Ages in Europe knew nothing about this. They didn't know anything. They were completely divorced from what had been before. They did not know this history. And these wonderful wonders started coming into Europe, and it excited this excited the development of the Renaissance. It is the rebirth of the learning and the wonderful artistic and architectural achievements that were achieved by the Greeks and the Romans. And of course, the Europeans were more than ready to assimilate all this and start, and they did. And we had this massive flowering of talent and mostly church-sponsored, because the church was the only one with any money in those days after the Dark Ages. The church had kept Christianity alive in the monasteries with little manuscripts, and the monks had copied the Bible for centuries, year after year, decade after decade. Monks had sat and the monks and the scribes had kept Christianity alive during the Dark Ages. Now we have this amazing Renaissance flowering. Renaissance means rebirth. And I want to show you the culmination, one of the culminating paintings, 259, of the Renaissance is this amazing Peter Paul Rubens illustrating Christ's death on the cross. Get out of the shadow.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Christ's death on the cross. Nothing can pull your heartstrings more than this. It is beyond expressive. It's exaggerated. It's everybody is weeping or wailing or grimacing or holding swords. And look at these two figures in the distance down here. They're looking up from the bottom of the mountain over this ledge. Look at them looking up at this wondrous thing that is happening on the top of Golgotha. So this is the extent to which the Western depiction of the religious figures moved. Here's probably Mary Magdalene fainting, and Christ dead on the cross. And look at the two robbers, look at the two other criminals in their agony. Look at the beautiful depiction of the legs. Amazing anatomy, better than the Greeks, more mobile than the Greeks, much more expressive than the Greek. So that's where the Western civilization went. Meantime, back in Byzantium, the popularity of the go outside. The popularity of the Greek icon grew and grew. And then there came a time in the 8th century, it was 736, when the church fathers in the East, in Byzantium, and the Pope in Rome, they got together and they said this was not right, that the people were taking home little images of Christ and worshipping this piece of wood. And there was a huge controversy for 120 years, about the the problem of the icon and its relationship to what the church had been teaching all along, or the Old Testament taught us: thou shalt not worship false gods. You cannot worship an idol. You have to worship the one God, and he cannot be represented in any way on earth. So the church fathers started worrying about this. The Greeks did not want to lose their icons. So we had the iconoclasts. It was called the iconoclastic debate. It was mostly the church fathers saying this has got to be exterminated. This terrible craze for icons, we've got to exterminate it. The iconophiles tried desperately to hold on to their icons, and in the end they won. And they won on a technicality. They said that we are not worshipping, this does not represent God. It is like the altar in the church. It is like the pews that we sit on. It is like the cloth. It is part of a church vestment. It is part of a ceremony. It is part of a ceremony. We are not worshipping this piece of wood. And in the end, they won, but with very strict controls over them. Can we have a break while I get rid of the dogs? Interruption.
Just wait. Okay.
I'm rushing to the end now. So the church fathers were actually defeated. Icons were permitted, but they were very strictly controlled by the church and the state in Byzantium. And nobody can say it better than Paul Johnson in his new art history. He's taking a very long view and educated view of this. And this is what he says, and it really puts it in a nutshell. I'm going to read a little bit now. For the ordinary Christians of the Byzantine Empire, the most important aspect of religious art affected by the iconoclast controversy was the icon itself, which was often the chief focus of their devotions in church, as well as the commonest form of religious artifact in the home. Painted images of Christ, the Virgin and Child, and other stock figures in Christian worship, usually executed in tempera on a panel, were a product of the catacombs in Rome and became common in the Byzantine Empire from its foundation. So when the Romans moved to Byzantium, they took these little icons with them. They were a universal feature of the Eastern Church, which never became important in the Latin West, as I've explained to you. They were popular and helped to explain why the Byzantine form of Christianity spread so rapidly in the Balkans, north of the Black Sea, and deep into the land of Rus, Russia. More pervasive than the grandeur of cathedral art were the small, comparatively cheap and ubiquitous icons, which came to represent the everyday form of Orthodox devotion, both in the Greek and Russian incarnations. They constituted the commonest form of art throughout a vast region embracing nearly 20 modern countries. It is important to grasp, however, that in Orthodox eyes, the icon never has been and is not to this day a mere artistic representation of a religious personage or event. It is a physical part of the act of worship, like altar furniture, vestments, banners, and sacred vessels. It springs from the Orthodox concept of the doctrine of salvation. God became man in order that man might become God. Painting an icon is thus itself a spiritual act. The painter realized the divine within himself and recreated, in a real sense, the image of Christ, or the events depicted, the incarnation, the nativity, the visit of the three kings. The spiritual state of the artist was, therefore, a key factor in the quality of his work, and iconists were most esteemed when they belonged to the schools of mysticism or devotion. One more little bit. The spiritual concept of the icon also had a restrictive effect on the artist. The object of the painting is to produce not so much what the eyes see as what the spiritual impulse creates. Perspective is of no significance, for events are not presented in earthly space. Time has no existence, so vigor, activity, dynamism, getting from here to there, cannot form the subject matter. The world is depicted as timeless, suspended, silent, and motionless. Light and shade are by iconic definition unnatural, for Christ and his saints are themselves the source of illumination. If the icon degenerates into realism and illusionism, it loses its spiritual property and ceases to be an icon at all. Now, this was very, very strictly controlled by the church and by the state. So the artists were confined to very stylized patterns within which they could operate. No human emotion, only spiritual aspects. So I want to show you, for an example, number 67. Sorry, 67. Here is an example of late Byzantine art. This is in a church. It is not on a. It's not an icon. It is. It is a big piece. It has come out of one of the churches, I expect. But you can see how very stylized it is. How the face is. We all recognize that face. It's on every icon. How very stylized the clothes are. How this chair, and it's very ornate. This would have been used thousands of times by preceding artists. There's nothing new here. The child doesn't move. If you think of Leonardo da Vinci, illustrating the Madonna of the Rocks, perhaps, with the Madonna sitting there with the Christ child in her lap, and he's lifting up his hand to touch her face, full of love. There's emotion coming between them. There's no emotion here. This little Christ he's got a cross through his head, and he is very, very stylized. He's following the format that has been used and permitted by the church for nearly 1,000 years. There's although she inclines her head to him, there's no mother love here. There's no emotion. The next one I wanted to show you was number 64, and this illustrates that sometimes the church couldn't control everything, and the church fathers were not always on duty, and that the Byzantine Empire still included parts of Italy, and Sicily, the island of Sicily, was one of these. And this Christ it is tempera on a church roof. You can see that this Christ's face is departing from the strict stylization of the Madonna that we've just seen. He's got wrinkles on his brow. He looks old and he looks sad. and he looks as though he's carrying the troubles of the world on his shoulders. There's still a lot of stylization in the robe and the hand, but there is a departure in this face which maybe the church fathers would not have approved of. If we can go back to this Madonna and Child that we were looking at, just to illustrate what was going on in the West at the same time, this is exactly, it's exactly the same time as this crucifix in number 77 in the West. Can you help me to find this? 77.
71.
70.
There's 85.
This is 109.
Just one on.
71 here.
63. 65.
I'm upside down.
Yeah,
This
65.
is
Let me
92.
do
I
it.
want 71.
No, 65, 67, 71.
I want 77. I want illustration number 77. This is 106.
Oh, I thought you meant page number.
77. I'm sorry for the hold up. I cannot see upside down. 77. Here it is.
Page number.
So that Madonna and Child in that very Byzantine gold and thing that we've just seen is exactly at the same time. It's contemporary. It's contemporary with this crucifix. Do you see the movement in this Christ figure? Do you see how realistically he's portrayed? Do you see that he's got form, he's got shadows, he's got roundness, he's three-dimensional. The date of it is 1285. So that little illustration depicts how the West had moved away in the depiction of the figures compared to the East. And I can show you another little one here. Look at this. Look at that. This is about 1300. Please don't stand in the shadow. There you are. This is Giotto. This is Giotto. Look how there is scale. The tree is small in the distance. The hills, there is space. There is scale. There is emotion. There's a different emotion on every single one of these faces, which we would never see in the East. It would not be permitted by the church. A very beautiful lamentation over Christ's body, about 1300. And you can see this in Padua. So, what did this do? In the long run, although the Byzantine Empire lasted for a whole 1,000 years before the Islamic nations finally captured it and subjugated Byzantium and turned Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So a whole 1,000 years went by and art did not develop because it was regulated. For those 1,000 years, icons were produced, hundreds and thousands of them were produced, but within very strict guidelines. In Russia, they were not quite so strict, and I've got a very beautiful little one to show you. Where is it? 113. In Russia, they were not quite so strict. A Russian Orthodox, this is in Sinai. This is in Egypt, actually. But this is a typical, very beautiful little icon. If you can see that. Can you see that little icon? That would have been quite an expensive icon. Sonia will tell you how pervasive icons still are in Greece. She'll tell you the story of going to the Parthenon, and in the marketplace below the Parthenon, there are thousands of icons still for sale. They always have been, they always will be, and they always take the same form. You can, and they, of course, they're mass produced now. They print out all these, thousands and thousands of little pictures, and they use glue and they stick it onto a wooden panel, and sell them to tourists. They sell them to worshippers. They are as ubiquitous and as pervasive as they ever were. But art did not develop because of this. The pictorial arts did not develop. The architectural arts developed, but the pictorial and sculpture was not allowed. You can imagine the Greek Orthodox Church did not allow sculptures. It was idolatrous. So all the sculpture that developed in the West did not develop in the East. And all this amazing, expressive and emotional outpouring of religious art that happened in the West never happened in the East. And it would be interesting now, as a second part to this, because I'm finished for today, it will be interesting to take this now into the modern day and to see how the depiction of religious art has changed, and how the icon has perhaps influenced people like Picasso and I'm thinking of Monet. I'm thinking of the moderns. It would be quite interesting to look carefully at iconic art in relation to the modern world, and to see how much influence there is there. So maybe we can look at that another day. I hope I haven't been too long and too boring. Thank you for listening to me. Cheerio till next time.